The sound of my daughter's laughter still echoes in my nightmares, cold and calculating. Nothing like the sweet giggles I remembered from her childhood. Finally free from you. Those 5 words shattered my world more violently than the 60-foot drop that followed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because what happened on that mountain changed everything I thought I knew about family, love, and survival. My name is Margaret Wilson, and I'm 64 years old. I live in a modest 2-story house in Boise, Idaho, where I've spent the last 38 years raising my children and building what I thought was a loving family. I worked as a nurse for 42 years, saving every penny I could for my children's futures. Over the decades, I put aside nearly $340,000 in savings and investments, money that was meant to secure their dreams and my own retirement. That crisp October morning started like any other. My daughter Emily, now 36, had been unusually attentive lately. After months of seeming distant and irritated by my presence, she suddenly wanted to spend time together. She suggested we watch the sunrise from Eagles Peak, a beautiful spot about an hour's drive from Boise. "Mom, we never spend quality time together anymore," she said with tears in her eyes. "I want to make memories with you while we still can." Her words melted my heart. Emily had been struggling financially since her divorce 2 years ago, and I'd been helping her with her mortgage payments, about $1,800 monthly, while she got back on her feet. I thought perhaps she was finally ready to rebuild our relationship. I was wrong, so terribly, devastatingly wrong. The drive up the mountain was filled with what I thought was comfortable conversation. Emily asked about my will, my bank accounts, my retirement plans. At the time, I thought she was genuinely concerned about my future. I told her about the $340,000 I'd saved, how I planned to split it between her and her brother Michael, and how I'd already put her name on several of my accounts to make things easier when the time came. When we reached the peak, the sunrise was breathtaking. The golden light painted the valley below in warm hues, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Emily stood beside me near the edge, and I felt closer to her than I had in years. That's when she moved behind me, placing her hands on my shoulders. "You know, Mom," she whispered, her voice suddenly different, colder. "You've always been such a burden, always interfering, always demanding attention, always making everything about yourself." I turned to look at her, confusion flooding my mind. The woman standing behind me wasn't the daughter I'd raised. Her eyes held a darkness I'd never seen before, a calculating cruelty that made my blood run cold. "Emily, what are you saying? I don't understand." That's when she laughed, that horrible, heartless laugh that still haunts me. She leaned close to my ear, her breath hot against my skin, and delivered those 5 words that would change everything. "Finally, free from you." I felt her hands push against my back. The world tilted, and suddenly I was falling, tumbling through the air, rocks and branches tearing at my clothes and skin. The last thing I remember was the sickening crack as my body hit the rocky ledge 60 feet below, and then everything went black. What Emily didn't know, what she couldn't have known in her moment of calculated evil, was that my husband Robert had followed us. Concerned about my safety after Emily's sudden change in behavior, he'd stayed hidden among the trees, watching everything unfold. His phone captured every word, every movement, every horrifying second of my daughter's betrayal. I spent 5 months in a coma, fighting for my life, while the doctors told my family there was little hope. But I was stronger than anyone imagined, and I had something worth fighting for: the truth. Now, as I sit here recovering, preparing to face the daughter who tried to murder me, I want to share this story with you. Because sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hurt us deepest, and sometimes survival is the greatest victory of all. If this story resonates with you, please like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Your support means everything to me as I share this difficult but important journey. The irony of my situation wasn't lost on me as I lay in that hospital bed, machines beeping around me like a mechanical symphony of survival. For 5 months, I existed in a twilight world between life and death, but my mind wasn't completely gone. I could hear everything: the whispered conversations, the fake tears, and most importantly, Emily's performance as the grieving daughter. Emily had always been my golden child, or so I thought. Born when I was 28, She came into this world with the biggest blue eyes and the sweetest smile. Her father, my first husband David, died in a car accident when she was only 8 years old. I remarried Robert when Emily was 12, and he'd been nothing but a loving stepfather to both her and her younger brother Michael. Throughout her childhood, Emily excelled at everything. She was valedictorian of her high school class, earned a full scholarship to Boise State University, and graduated summa cum laude with a degree in business administration. I was so proud, so blinded by her achievements, that I never saw the darkness growing beneath her perfect facade. After college, Emily married her high school sweetheart, James Morrison, in a beautiful ceremony that cost me $45,000. I didn't mind the expense. I wanted my daughter to have the perfect wedding. They seemed happy for a while, living in a beautiful home I helped them purchase with a $80,000 down payment from my savings. But cracks began to show in Emily's marriage around her 30th birthday. She started coming to me with stories about James's supposed infidelity, his drinking, his emotional abuse. My heart broke for her, and when she filed for divorce 2 years ago, I supported her completely. I helped her with legal fees totaling $15,000, and when she couldn't afford her mortgage payments, I stepped in without hesitation. Looking back now, I realize how expertly she played me. Every tear, every sob story, every desperate plea for help was carefully calculated. She knew exactly which heartstrings to pull, exactly how to make me feel like the protective mother swooping in to save her wounded daughter. During those months of unconsciousness, I heard Emily visiting regularly. She would sit by my bedside and cry. Real tears, from what the nurses told me. She spoke to me as if I could hear every word, telling me how sorry she was, how much she loved me, how she prayed every day for my recovery. "Please come back to me, Mom," she would whisper, holding my hand. "I can't lose you. You're all I have left." The nurses were moved by her devotion. They told Robert and Michael how lucky I was to have such a caring daughter, how Emily never missed a day of visiting, how she insisted on being involved in every medical decision. But what they didn't know, what no one knew except Robert, was that Emily was also busy during my coma. She had power of attorney over my finances, something I'd granted her 6 months before the accident when she convinced me it would make things easier for managing my medical care as I aged. While I fought for my life, Emily systematically drained my accounts. She transferred $125,000 to her personal account, claiming it was for my medical expenses not covered by insurance. She sold my car, a 2019 Honda Accord worth $18,000, saying I wouldn't need it anymore. She even convinced Michael that I had told her to liquidate some of my investments to ensure there would be money for long-term care. Michael, bless his heart, never questioned his sister. At 32, he was a gentle soul who worked as a teacher and lived a simple life with his wife Sarah and their 2 young children. He trusted Emily implicitly, believing that she was handling our mother's affairs with the same perfection she'd shown in everything else throughout her life. Robert suspected something was wrong, but he was grieving and overwhelmed by the possibility of losing me. Emily skillfully played the role of the devoted daughter while systematically destroying everything I'd worked for over 4 decades. The doctors said my recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Dr. Patricia Hendricks, my neurologist, told me later that patients with my level of brain trauma rarely survived, and if they did, they usually suffered severe cognitive impairment. But I fooled them all. My body was broken, but my mind was sharp as ever. When I finally opened my eyes on that March morning, the first face I saw was Emily's. She was holding my hand, tears streaming down her cheeks, looking every inch the devoted daughter. For a split second, I wondered if I had imagined everything, if the fall had been an accident and my memories were confused. Then I saw Robert standing behind her, and the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He knew. He had seen. And he had been waiting 5 long months for me to wake up so we could begin to set things right. "Mom," Emily sobbed, squeezing my hand. "Oh my God, you're awake. I was so scared I'd lost you forever." I looked into her eyes, those same blue eyes that had charmed everyone her entire life, and I saw the truth that had been hidden there all along. She wasn't crying from relief. She was crying from fear. Fear that her plan had failed, fear that I remembered, fear that her perfect crime was about to unravel. I couldn't speak yet. The ventilator had damaged my vocal cords, but I squeezed her hand back and managed what I hoped looked like a loving smile. Let her think I remembered nothing. Let her believe she was safe, because the real Margaret Wilson was about to emerge from this hospital bed, and she was going to be stronger, smarter, and more determined than Emily had ever imagined. The first few days after waking from my coma were a careful dance of deception. Every visitor who came to see me remarked on my miraculous recovery and praised Emily for her unwavering devotion. The nurses gushed about how she never left my side, how she advocated for my care, how she was the perfect daughter anyone could ask for, if only they knew the truth. My speech gradually returned, though my voice was raspy and weak. Emily was always present during the doctor's visits, taking notes, asking questions, playing her role to perfection. She spoke about my future care with such concern, mentioning how she'd already made arrangements for my recovery and how she was handling all the financial aspects so I wouldn't have to worry. Robert, meanwhile, remained silent but watchful. He would catch my eye occasionally, and I could see the weight of his secret burning behind his patient exterior. My husband of 26 years was not a man given to dramatics, but I could tell he was struggling with when and how to reveal what he knew. It was during my third day of consciousness that Robert finally found a moment alone with me. Emily had stepped out to get coffee, a rare absence that Robert had clearly been waiting for. "Margaret," he whispered, moving his chair closer to my bed. "I need to tell you something, but you have to promise me you'll stay calm. Can you do that?" I nodded, though my heart was already racing. I knew what was coming, but hearing it confirmed would make it real in a way that terrified me. Robert pulled out his phone with shaking hands. "I followed you that morning," he said quietly. Something about Emily's behavior had been bothering me for weeks. She was being too nice, too attentive. It reminded me of how she acted before she asked for money. He was right. Emily had a pattern. Whenever she needed something substantial, she would become the perfect daughter for a few weeks beforehand. Unexpected visits, thoughtful gifts, long conversations about family memories. I'd noticed it over the years, but had always dismissed it as coincidence. "I stayed hidden in the trees," Robert continued. "I was planning to surprise you both, maybe take some photos of you watching the sunrise together. But then," his voice broke, and I saw tears forming in his eyes. "You recorded it?" I whispered. He nodded. "Every word, every second. Margaret, I watched our daughter try to murder you, and I have proof." The phone screen lit up, and there was Emily's face, crystal clear in the morning light. Robert had been closer than I'd realized, and his phone had captured everything with stunning clarity. I watched myself turn toward Emily, saw the confusion on my face as she spoke those cruel words about being a burden. Then came the moment that still haunts my dreams. Emily's laugh, cold and calculated, followed by those 5 terrible words, "Finally free from you." The video showed her hands pushing against my back, my body falling, and then Emily looking down at the ledge where I lay broken and unconscious. But what chilled me to the bone was what happened next. Emily pulled out her own phone and dialed 911, and I listened to her give the performance of her life. "Help! Please, you have to send someone to Eagle's Peak. My mother fell. She was looking at the sunrise, and she lost her balance. Oh God, there's so much blood. Please hurry." The crying, the panic, the desperation in her voice. It was all perfectly crafted. She even threw herself onto the ground and scraped her hands and knees to make it look like she'd tried to grab me as I fell. "I climbed down to check on you," Robert continued, his voice barely audible. "You were unconscious, but breathing. Emily saw me coming and immediately switched back into performance mode. She begged me not to tell anyone I was there, said it would complicate the investigation and the insurance claims. She said people might think it was suspicious that we were both there." "And you agreed?" I asked. "I was in shock, Margaret. My wife was dying, my stepdaughter had just tried to commit murder, and I didn't know what to do. I made a terrible decision to stay silent while I figured out what to do next. I thought you were going to die, and I didn't want to deal with investigations and questions while I was grieving." I understood. Robert was a simple, honest man who worked as an accountant. He'd never faced anything like this before, and the trauma had paralyzed him into inaction. "But then you survived," he said, "and I realized I had evidence that could put Emily in prison. I've been waiting 5 months for you to wake up so we could decide what to do together." Just then, we heard Emily's footsteps in the hallway. Robert quickly put his phone away and moved his chair back to its original position. When Emily entered with her coffee and another Oscar-worthy smile, we were just a loving husband and wife having a quiet moment together. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Emily asked, settling into her usual chair by my bedside. "The doctors say you're making incredible progress. We should have you home soon." Home. The word made my stomach turn. Emily was already talking about my discharge, as if she would be in charge of my care, as if she hadn't tried to end my life just 5 months ago. "That sounds wonderful, sweetheart," I managed to say, forcing warmth into my voice. "I can't wait to get back to normal." But nothing would ever be normal again. Because now I knew the truth about my perfect daughter, and I had the evidence to prove it. The question was no longer whether Emily had tried to kill me. It was what I was going to do about it. As I lay there listening to Emily chatter about physical therapy and home care arrangements, I was already formulating a plan. My daughter thought she had destroyed me, thought she had finally gotten rid of the mother who was supposedly such a burden. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. Recovery from a 5-month coma is a gradual process, and Emily made sure she was involved in every aspect of my care. She spoke with my doctors about physical therapy, arranged for in-home nursing assistance, and presented herself as the devoted daughter who would manage every detail of my recovery. But I was growing stronger each day, and with Robert's help, I was beginning to uncover the full extent of Emily's betrayal. The day before my discharge, Robert brought me a manila folder he'd been quietly compiling. "I've been investigating while you were unconscious," he said during one of Emily's rare absences. "What she stole from you is worse than we thought." I opened the folder with trembling hands, though whether from my injuries or anticipation, I couldn't tell. Inside were bank statements, investment account summaries, and transaction records that painted a picture of systematic theft spanning the entire 5 months of my coma. The numbers were staggering. Emily had transferred $127,000 from my primary savings account to her personal checking account in 3 separate transactions. She justified each transfer to the bank as necessary medical expenses, using her power of attorney documents to authorize the moves. But that wasn't all. She'd liquidated my entire retirement portfolio worth $89,000, claiming she needed liquid assets to pay for experimental treatments not covered by insurance. The beautiful irony was that my insurance had actually covered almost everything. The total out-of-pocket medical expenses were only $8,400. "Look at this," Robert said, pointing to a series of smaller transactions. "She's been using your credit cards for her personal expenses. Grocery stores, gas stations, department stores, restaurants. She even charged a $3,200 vacation to Las Vegas on your American Express card." My hands shook as I flipped through credit card statements showing charges I'd never made. Designer clothes, expensive dinners, spa treatments, hotel rooms. Emily had been living like a queen while I fought for my life in a hospital bed. "The house is next," Robert said grimly. "I found out she's been meeting with real estate agents. She's planning to sell your house, claiming you'll need the money for long-term care facilities. My house, the modest 2-story home where I'd raised my children, where I'd planned to spend my retirement, where every room held 40 years of memories. The house I'd paid off completely just 3 years ago with money I'd saved by working double shifts and skipping vacations. Current market value is about $380,000, Robert continued. She's already had it appraised. I did the math in my head. If Emily succeeded in selling my house and had already stolen over $200,000 from my accounts, she would have access to nearly $600,000 of my life's work. Money I'd earned by working 16-hour shifts as a nurse, money I'd saved by buying generic groceries and secondhand clothes, money I'd set aside for my children's futures and my own security. "There's more," Robert said, his voice heavy with disgust. "I hired a private investigator to look into Emily's finances during your coma. She's been gambling, Margaret. Online poker, sports betting, trips to the casino. She's already lost about $40,000 of your money." The betrayal cut deeper than any physical injury I'd sustained in the fall. This wasn't just theft. It was the complete destruction of everything I'd worked for, orchestrated by the daughter I'd loved and supported unconditionally. "Why?" I whispered. "I gave her everything. I helped with her divorce, her mortgage, her legal fees. I never said no to her." "I think that's exactly why," Robert said. "The private investigator talked to some of Emily's friends. Apparently, she's been complaining for years about feeling entitled to your money. She told people that you were selfish for keeping your savings instead of giving them to her and Michael while you were still alive. I remembered conversations we'd had about inheritance, how Emily would joke that she hoped I wouldn't spend all my money before I died. At the time, I'd laughed it off as typical adult child humor. Now I realized she'd been completely serious. She also apparently resented the fact that you remarried, Robert continued. She told friends that you should have remained faithful to her father's memory and that I was just a gold digger after your money. This was particularly painful because Robert had actually brought substantial assets to our marriage. He'd never needed my money and had often encouraged me to spend more on myself instead of constantly saving for the future. What about Michael? I asked. Does he know? Robert shook his head. Emily convinced him that you'd authorized all the financial transactions before your accident. She showed him fake documents suggesting you wanted her to have access to your accounts in case of emergency. Michael thinks she's being responsible by managing your money. My son. My gentle, trusting son, who had always seen the best in everyone, especially his sister. Emily had manipulated him just as expertly as she'd manipulated me. As I lay there processing the magnitude of Emily's betrayal, I felt something changing inside me. The old Margaret, the one who had always put her children first, who had sacrificed her own needs for their happiness, who had trusted blindly because she loved deeply, was dying. In her place was emerging a woman who had stared death in the face and survived, who had been betrayed by her own daughter and lived to tell about it, who had lost everything but gained something far more valuable, the truth. Emily thought she had destroyed me on that mountain. She thought she had finally gotten rid of the burden of my love, my expectations, my very existence. But she had made one critical error. She had underestimated the strength of a mother's fury when she discovers her child is not who she thought they were. The old Margaret would have confronted Emily privately, would have begged for an explanation, would have probably forgiven her and tried to rebuild their relationship. But the new Margaret, the one who had survived a 60-foot fall and 5 months in a coma, had different plans entirely. The day I was discharged from the hospital, Emily arrived with a wheelchair decorated with yellow ribbons and a bouquet of sunflowers, my favorite flowers. She'd also brought a photographer friend to capture the joyous moment of my homecoming, though I suspected the real purpose was to create evidence of her devoted daughter image. "I've prepared everything at home for you, Mom," Emily said as she pushed my wheelchair toward the hospital exit. "I've set up a bedroom on the first floor so you won't have to climb stairs, arranged for a home health aide, and stocked the refrigerator with all your favorite foods." The reporters and photographers that Emily had somehow alerted to my recovery gathered around us. One local news reporter thrust a microphone toward Emily. "How does it feel to have your mother back home after such a traumatic experience?" Emily's eyes filled with practiced tears. "It's a miracle. I never gave up hope, but there were moments when the doctors weren't sure she'd make it. I'm just grateful to have my mom back. She's my best friend, and I don't know what I would have done without her." I played my part, smiling weakly and letting Emily guide the narrative. But inside, I was studying her performance with new eyes, seeing the calculation behind every gesture, every word, every tear. The ride home was surreal. Emily chattered constantly about all the arrangements she'd made, the improvements she'd done to the house, how excited she was to take care of me during my recovery. She even mentioned that she'd been staying in my house during my hospitalization to keep it safe and maintained. When we pulled into my driveway, I immediately noticed changes. The garden I'd spent years cultivating was overgrown and neglected. The paint on the front porch was peeling, and several shutters were hanging crooked. For someone who claimed to be maintaining my house, Emily had done a poor job. Inside, the changes were more dramatic. Furniture had been rearranged, and I noticed several valuable items were missing. The antique clock my mother had left me was gone, as was the silver tea service I'd inherited from my grandmother. When I asked about them, Emily had ready explanations. "I had to put some things in storage to make room for your medical equipment," she said smoothly. "Don't worry, everything is safe and documented." But I knew better. Robert had already checked, and there was no storage unit. Emily had sold my family heirlooms, probably to fund more of her gambling or lavish spending. The bedroom Emily had set up for me was actually my own master bedroom, which she'd moved into during my hospitalization. She'd relegated my things to the guest room and made herself comfortable in the space Robert and I had shared for over 2 decades. "I thought it would be easier for you to recover in the main bedroom," she explained when she saw my confusion. "The guest room is smaller and doesn't have as much natural light." Robert caught my eye, and shook his head almost imperceptibly. We both knew Emily had simply claimed the master bedroom as her own and was now trying to justify it. Over the next few days, I began to see the full extent of Emily's takeover of my life. She'd changed the locks on my house and hadn't given Robert a new key. She intercepted my mail, claiming she was protecting me from stressful financial documents. She'd even convinced my bank to require her approval for any account access, using my power of attorney documents and claims about my mental state after the brain injury. The home health aide Emily had hired was actually her friend Jessica, who had no medical training but was being paid $25 an hour from my accounts. Jessica's job seemed to be less about my care and more about monitoring my activities and reporting back to Emily. "Your daughter is so devoted," Jessica would say, as she helped me with basic tasks I could actually do myself. "She calls 3 times a day to check on you. You're so lucky to have such a caring child." If only she knew that Emily's calls were about monitoring my recovery and making sure I wasn't regaining too much independence too quickly. But Emily had made one crucial mistake in her careful planning. She'd underestimated Robert's determination to protect me, and she'd been so focused on managing my finances that she'd overlooked the evidence Robert had been gathering. During my first week home, Robert managed to have a private conversation with Michael. He showed him Emily's spending records, the unexplained transactions, and the evidence of her systematic theft. Michael's reaction was exactly what we'd expected: shock, disbelief, and then growing anger as the truth became clear. "I can't believe I defended her," Michael said, his voice shaking. "She told me Mom had asked her to manage everything, that it was all planned before the accident. She even showed me documents." "Forged documents," Robert confirmed. "Your mother never authorized those transfers." The 3 of us, Robert, Michael, and I, began meeting secretly while Emily was out running her errands, which we'd discovered were actually trips to the casino or meetings with the real estate agent about selling my house. "We need to be careful," I warned them. "Emily is desperate now. She's invested too much in this plan to back down quietly. If she realizes we know the truth, she might try something drastic." Michael looked at his mother with new eyes that saw the extent of my injuries, the slow pace of my recovery, the fact that I was still vulnerable. "You think she might try to hurt you again?" "I think," I said carefully, "that Emily has already shown us exactly what she's capable of. We need to assume she'll do whatever it takes to protect herself." That night, as I lay in what used to be my own bedroom but was now Emily's domain, I listened to her moving around the house like she owned it, because in her mind, she did own it. She'd tried to kill me for it, she'd stolen my money to pay for it, and she'd moved herself into it like the grieving daughter who was nobly sacrificing her own life to care for her invalid mother. But Emily's perfect plan had one fatal flaw. She'd been so confident in her ability to manipulate everyone around her that she'd never considered the possibility that someone might be watching, might be recording, might be gathering evidence against her. Tomorrow, Robert and I would begin putting our own plan into motion. Emily thought she held all the cards, but she was about to discover that the mother she'd tried to destroy was not only alive, she was ready to fight back. And this time, Emily wouldn't see it coming. 3 weeks into my supposed recovery at home, Emily's mask was beginning to slip. The constant act of playing the devoted daughter was taking its toll, especially as I grew stronger and more independent each day. She'd expected me to remain weak and dependent, requiring her constant care and justifying her control over my life and finances. Instead, I was recovering faster than anyone had anticipated. My physical therapy sessions were going well, my cognitive function was sharp, and I was beginning to ask uncomfortable questions about my finances and property. "Mom, you really shouldn't worry about money right now," Emily said when I asked to see my bank statements. "The doctor said stress could cause setbacks in your recovery. I'm handling everything perfectly." But I persisted, and finally she brought me a folder of documents that I immediately recognized as fraudulent. The bank statements showed account balances that were far higher than what Robert's investigation had revealed. Emily had created fake documents to hide the extent of her theft. "These numbers don't look right," I said, studying the papers carefully. "My retirement account shows a balance of $89,000, but I thought you said you had to liquidate it for medical expenses." Emily's face tightened almost imperceptibly. "These are old statements, Mom. Your memory is still fuzzy from the brain injury. You're getting confused about the timeline." It was a clever gaslighting technique, using my brain injury as an excuse to dismiss any questions or concerns I raised. But my memory was crystal clear, and I was documenting every lie Emily told me. Meanwhile, Robert and Michael were building our case systematically. Michael had obtained copies of all the real bank statements, showing the true extent of Emily's theft. Robert had compiled video evidence not just of the attempted murder, but also of Emily's activities during my coma, including footage from the casino where she'd gambled away thousands of my dollars. The private investigator Robert had hired, a former police detective named Tom Bradley, had uncovered even more damaging information about Emily's activities. She'd been telling people that I was dying and that she was my sole heir. She'd even met with a funeral director to make advance arrangements for my death, paying the $8,000 deposit with money stolen from my accounts. She was so confident you wouldn't survive, Tom told us during one of our secret meetings. She'd already picked out your casket and planned your funeral service. She told the funeral director that you'd specifically requested to be cremated, so there would be no gravesite for people to visit. The cremation detail was particularly chilling. Emily knew that cremation would destroy any evidence of trauma that might contradict her story about an accidental fall. She'd thought of everything, except the possibility that Robert had witnessed and recorded her crime. But perhaps the most disturbing discovery came when Michael searched Emily's laptop while she was out. He found a folder labeled Financial Planning that contained spreadsheets detailing exactly how she planned to spend my money. She'd budgeted $150,000 for a new house in a different state, $50,000 for a luxury car, $25,000 for plastic surgery, and $75,000 for what she called lifestyle improvements. The remaining money was allocated for gambling and entertainment expenses over the next 5 years. Emily had planned my murder down to the smallest financial detail. "There's something else," Michael said, his voice heavy with disgust. "I found emails between Emily and someone named Marcus. They've been planning this for months." Marcus turned out to be Emily's secret boyfriend, a man she'd been seeing since before her divorce. The emails revealed that Emily's marriage hadn't ended because of James's supposed infidelity. It had ended because Emily was having an affair and wanted to access her inheritance without having to share it with a husband. The emails were damning. Emily had written to Marcus about her plan to eliminate the obstacles to her inheritance. She'd researched my medical history, looking for ways to make my death appear natural. When she couldn't find a suitable existing condition to exploit, she'd settled on the plan to stage an accidental fall. "Once the old woman is gone, we'll have everything we need for our new life together," she'd written to Marcus just 2 weeks before taking me to Eagles Peak. "I'm tired of pretending to be the loving daughter. After Sunday, I'll finally be free." Reading those words was like being pushed off that cliff all over again. The daughter I'd raised, loved, and sacrificed for had reduced me to the old woman who was standing between her and the life she wanted. But Emily had made one crucial error in her calculations. She'd assumed that even if I survived the fall, I would be too brain damaged to function independently. She'd planned to have me declared mentally incompetent and placed in a care facility where she could continue to control my finances until I died naturally. She hadn't counted on my complete recovery or my ability to see through her deceptions. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. James, Emily's ex-husband, contacted Robert after hearing about my accident. He'd been following the news coverage and wanted to offer his support, but he also had information that would prove crucial to our case. "Emily tried to kill me too," he told Robert during a phone conversation that Robert recorded with James's permission. "About 6 months before she filed for divorce, she suggested we go hiking at Eagles Peak, said she wanted to work on our marriage, and thought getting back to nature might help us reconnect." The parallels were chilling. Emily had used the same location, the same setup, the same innocent suggestion of watching the sunrise together. But James had been suspicious of Emily's sudden interest in hiking, especially since she'd always hated outdoor activities. "I made an excuse not to go," James continued. "Something about her behavior felt off. She was being too nice, too eager to spend time together. It reminded me of how she acted when she wanted something." James had also discovered financial irregularities during their divorce proceedings. Emily had been secretly draining their joint accounts and hiding assets. She'd tried to have him declared mentally unstable during the divorce, claiming he was having a breakdown and couldn't be trusted with financial decisions. "Your daughter is a sociopath," James told Robert bluntly. "She's charming and manipulative, and she'll destroy anyone who stands between her and what she wants. I'm just glad I got away from her before she succeeded in whatever she was planning. Now we had a pattern of behavior, multiple witnesses, financial records, video evidence, and documented threats. Emily's web of lies was unraveling, but she still didn't know it. As I sat in my own living room, watching Emily move through my house like she owned it, I felt a cold satisfaction knowing that her perfect crime was about to become her perfect downfall. The time for gathering evidence was almost over. Soon, it would be time for justice. By my 4th week home, we had accumulated enough evidence to bury Emily, but we needed to be strategic about how we proceeded. Tom Bradley, our private investigator, recommended we involve the police and district attorney's office, but he warned us that Emily might try to flee or destroy evidence if she suspected we were onto her. We need to catch her in the act of something we can arrest her for immediately, Tom explained during one of our secret meetings. The attempted murder charge will take time to process, and the financial crimes need to be documented formally by the bank's fraud department. But if we can catch her committing a crime right now, we can arrest her and then add the other charges. The opportunity came sooner than we expected. Emily had been pressuring me to sign new power of attorney documents that would give her even broader control over my assets. She'd also been trying to get me to sign papers transferring the deed of my house to her name. It's just for estate planning purposes, Mom, she explained. If something happens to you, this will make everything easier for Michael and me. You know how complicated probate can be. But Robert and I had a different plan. We contacted Detective Sarah Morrison at the Boise Police Department, who specialized in elder abuse cases. After reviewing our evidence, she agreed to help us set up a sting operation. We'll position recording equipment throughout the house, Detective Morrison explained. When Emily tries to get you to sign those documents, we want you to ask specific questions about what you're signing and what will happen to your money. If she lies to you or tries to defraud you while we're recording, we can arrest her immediately. The plan was set for a Friday morning when Emily had scheduled what she called a financial planning meeting with me. She'd arranged for Jessica, her friend who was posing as my health aide, to be present as a witness to my signatures. That morning, Emily arrived with a folder full of official-looking documents and her usual fake smile. She'd even brought coffee and pastries from my favorite bakery, a nice touch for what she thought would be the final step in gaining complete control over my assets. I know this seems complicated, Mom, but I've had lawyers prepare everything to protect your interests, Emily said, as she spread the papers across my kitchen table. Hidden cameras and microphones captured every word. The first document was indeed a new power of attorney, but it was far more comprehensive than anything I'd previously signed. It would give Emily the right to make all medical decisions for me, sell my property without my consent, and access every account I owned. What exactly does this power of attorney allow you to do? I asked, following the script Detective Morrison had prepared. Oh, just the basic things we discussed, Emily replied vaguely. Managing your accounts, paying your bills, that sort of thing. But it says here you can sell my house without asking me. Is that necessary? Emily's expression tightened slightly. Well, we've talked about the possibility that you might need to move to a care facility eventually. This just gives me the flexibility to handle that transition smoothly. And what would happen to the money from selling my house? It would go into your accounts to pay for your care, of course, Emily lied smoothly. We already knew she'd been meeting with real estate agents and had planned to pocket the proceeds. The second document was even more audacious, a quitclaim deed that would transfer ownership of my house directly to Emily. She presented it as a simple estate planning tool. This is just to avoid probate taxes, she explained. Lots of families do this. You'll still live here for as long as you want, but legally the house will be mine, so there won't be complications when the time comes. So, I would no longer own my own house? I asked. Technically, no, but practically nothing would change. You'd still live here, still make all the decisions about the property. This is just paperwork. It was a blatant lie. Once Emily owned the house, she could sell it, evict me, or do whatever she wanted with it. I would have no legal rights to the home I'd worked 40 years to pay for. The third document was perhaps the most cruel. A new will that left everything to Emily and completely cut Michael out of his inheritance. I thought you said Michael and I would split everything equally, I said, reading through the document. Well, Michael has his teaching job and his stable family, Emily replied. He doesn't really need the money like I do. And since I'm the one taking care of you, it seems fair that I should inherit the bulk of your estate. As Emily continued explaining why she deserved my entire life's savings, Detective Morrison and her team were listening to every word from their position in the unmarked van outside my house. "Now, Mom, I need you to sign each document," Emily said, producing a pen. "Jessica is here to witness your signatures, and I'll have them notarized this afternoon." This was the moment we'd been waiting for. I picked up the pen and pretended to consider the documents. "Emily, I want to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Of course, Mom. You can ask me anything. Did you push me off that cliff?" The silence that followed was deafening. Emily's face went through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, fear, and finally anger. "Mom, what are you talking about? You fell. You were looking at the sunrise and you lost your balance. I tried to catch you, remember?" "I remember you laughing," I said quietly. "I remember you saying, 'Finally, free from you.'" Emily stood up so quickly that her chair fell backward. "You're confused, Mom. The brain injury is affecting your memory. You're imagining things that didn't happen." "Am I imagining the money you stole from my accounts? The house you're trying to steal? The funeral arrangements you made while I was in a coma?" Emily's mask finally slipped completely. The sweet, caring daughter disappeared, replaced by someone I didn't recognize. "You know what?" she snarled. "Maybe I should have pushed harder. Maybe I should have made sure you didn't survive that fall. You've been nothing but a burden my entire adult life, always judging me, always controlling me with your money. I earned every penny I took from you." At that moment, Detective Morrison and her team burst through my front door. "Emily Wilson, you're under arrest for attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, and theft," Detective Morrison announced as she handcuffed my daughter. Emily's eyes went wide with shock and then fury. "This is entrapment. She tricked me. Whatever I said doesn't count because she manipulated me into saying it." But it was too late. Emily had confessed to attempted murder on camera, admitted to stealing my money, and revealed her true feelings about the mother she'd tried to kill. As they led her away, Emily looked back at me with pure hatred. "You think you've won? You have no idea what I'm capable of. This isn't over." But it was over. Emily's perfect crime had become her perfect downfall, and justice was finally within reach. Emily's arrest made front-page news in Boise. The story of a daughter who tried to murder her mother for inheritance money captivated the public, and Emily quickly became the most hated person in our community. But she wasn't going down without a fight. Within hours of her arrest, Emily had hired Marcus Rodriguez, one of the most expensive criminal defense attorneys in Idaho. Marcus, ironically sharing a name with Emily's secret boyfriend, immediately began spinning a narrative that portrayed Emily as the real victim. "My client is a devoted daughter who has spent months caring for her brain-injured mother," he told reporters outside the courthouse. "Margaret Wilson is suffering from trauma-induced paranoia and false memories. She's confused about what happened on that mountain, and she's being manipulated by a husband who wants to control her inheritance." It was a clever strategy. Emily's lawyer was trying to use my brain injury against me, suggesting that my testimony couldn't be trusted and that Robert was the real manipulator in this situation. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks after Emily's arrest. During that time, she was released on $500,000 bail, money that, ironically, came from the accounts she'd stolen from me. Her lawyer had convinced the judge that Emily posed no flight risk because she was too devoted to her mother to abandon her. Emily immediately launched a public relations campaign to rehabilitate her image. She gave interviews to local news stations, portraying herself as a misunderstood daughter who had sacrificed everything to care for her invalid mother. "I moved into my mother's house to take care of her," she told Channel 7 News. "I managed her finances, arranged her medical care, and put my own life on hold to ensure she had everything she needed. And this is how she repays me, with false accusations and lies." Emily even organized a prayer vigil for my recovery from mental illness at the church we'd attended together for years. Many of our old friends and neighbors attended, confused by the conflicting stories they were hearing. But Robert, Michael, and I weren't sitting idle. District Attorney Jennifer Walsh had assigned her best prosecutor, David Chen, to handle Emily's case. Chen was known for his meticulous preparation and his ability to present complex financial crimes in ways that juries could understand. "The evidence against Emily is overwhelming," Chen told us during our first meeting. The video Robert recorded is devastating, and the financial crimes are well documented. But her lawyer is good, and he's going to try to make this case about your mental state rather than Emily's actions. Chen's strategy was to present the evidence chronologically, showing the jury how Emily had planned and executed both the attempted murder and the systematic theft of my assets. He would use Emily's own emails and financial records to prove premeditation, and Robert's video to show exactly what happened on Eagles Peak. The trial began on a cold February morning, 4 months after Emily's arrest. The courthouse was packed with reporters and spectators, many of whom had followed the case since Emily's arrest. Emily sat at the defense table looking pale and fragile, wearing a conservative blue dress and minimal makeup, a calculated attempt to appear sympathetic. Chen's opening statement was powerful and direct. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case is about a daughter who tried to murder her mother for money. Emily Wilson didn't want to wait for her inheritance. She wanted it all, and she wanted it immediately. So she lured her 64-year-old mother to a remote cliff, pushed her 60 feet to what she thought would be her death, and then spent 5 months systematically stealing everything Margaret Wilson had worked 40 years to save. Emily's lawyer responded with his mental health defense. What you're going to see in this trial is a brain-injured woman whose trauma has caused her to create false memories about her daughter. Emily Wilson is guilty of nothing more than loving her mother too much and sacrificing her own life to care for her. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Chen started with the financial evidence, showing the jury bank records, credit card statements, and transaction logs that proved Emily had stolen over $200,000 from my accounts while I was in a coma. Financial crimes investigator Lisa Park testified about Emily's spending patterns during my hospitalization. The defendant spent thousands of dollars on gambling, luxury goods, and entertainment while claiming the money was needed for her mother's medical care. She stayed in expensive hotels, ate at high-end restaurants, and made multiple trips to Las Vegas casinos. The evidence showed that Emily had spent more money on gambling in 5 months than I typically spent on all my living expenses in an entire year. Next, Chen presented Emily's emails with her boyfriend Marcus, the real Marcus. These emails revealed Emily's complete lack of remorse and her detailed planning for how she would spend my money after my death. "I can't wait until Sunday," Emily had written 3 days before taking me to Eagles Peak. "After this weekend, all our problems will be solved and we can start our new life together." But the most damaging evidence was yet to come. Chen had saved Robert's video for the climax of his case. When the lights dimmed and the courtroom fell silent, every person in that room watched Emily laugh and say, "Finally free from you," before pushing me off that cliff. Several jury members gasped audibly. One woman in the front row began crying. Emily's own lawyer looked shaken as he watched his client's actions played out in high definition. The video was so clear, so undeniably damning, that Emily's claims of innocence became impossible to maintain. The jury could see her calculating expression, hear her heartless laughter, and witness the deliberate push that sent me tumbling to what she hoped would be my death. When it was Emily's turn to testify in her own defense, she stuck to her story, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. "My mother is confused," she insisted, tears streaming down her face. "The brain injury has affected her memory and her judgment. I love her more than anything in the world. I would never hurt her." But Chen's cross-examination was brutal. He walked Emily through every financial transaction, every lie she'd told, every piece of evidence that contradicted her claims of innocence. "Ms. Wilson, if you love your mother so much, why did you spend $40,000 of her money gambling while she was fighting for her life in a coma?" "I was under stress. I made some poor decisions." "Poor decisions? You made funeral arrangements for your mother while she was still alive. You picked out her casket and paid for cremation services. Does that sound like the behavior of someone who expected their mother to recover?" Emily had no good answer for that. Her lawyer objected repeatedly, but the damage was done. The jury could see that Emily was a calculating predator who had tried to profit from my death. After 6 days of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with their verdict. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of elder abuse, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of fraud in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of theft in the first degree, we find the defendant guilty. Emily collapsed as the verdicts were read. Her lawyer immediately filed for an appeal, but the evidence had been too overwhelming for any other outcome. 3 weeks later, Emily was sentenced to 25 years in prison. The judge's words during sentencing captured exactly how I felt about my daughter's betrayal. Ms. Wilson, you violated the most fundamental bond in human society, the bond between parent and child. You tried to murder the woman who gave you life, and you showed no remorse for your actions. This court has rarely seen such a calculated and heartless crime. As Emily was led away in shackles, she turned to look at me one last time. But instead of the hatred I'd seen during her arrest, I saw something that looked almost like recognition, as if she finally understood the magnitude of what she'd lost. Not just her freedom, but the love of a mother who would have given her anything if she'd only asked instead of trying to take it by force. The months following Emily's conviction were a strange mixture of relief, grief, and gradual healing. While justice had been served, I was still dealing with the emotional devastation of learning that my daughter had tried to murder me. The physical injuries from my fall were healing, but the wounds to my heart felt much deeper and more permanent. Recovery of my stolen assets proved to be a complex legal process. While Emily had spent nearly $80,000 of my money on gambling and personal expenses, the majority of the stolen funds were still recoverable. The bank's fraud investigation team worked with law enforcement to trace every transaction and reverse what they could. We've recovered $156,000 so far, my attorney, Patricia Summers, told me during one of our meetings. The house sale hadn't gone through yet, so that's safe. We're still working on recovering the money from the liquidated retirement accounts, but the insurance company is cooperating fully. The emotional cost, however, was incalculable. I had to completely rebuild my understanding of who Emily was and what our relationship had actually meant. The loving daughter I thought I'd raised had been a carefully constructed illusion, and the real Emily was someone I'd never truly known. Robert was incredible throughout this process. Despite the trauma of witnessing his stepdaughter's attempt to murder his wife, he remained strong and supportive. Our marriage, tested by this unimaginable crisis, emerged stronger than ever. I keep thinking about all the signs I missed, I told him one evening as we sat in our living room. Finally, hours again after Emily's arrest. How could I have been so blind to what she really was? Because you loved her, Robert replied simply. That's what parents do. They see the best in their children, sometimes even when it's not there anymore. Michael struggled even more than I did with accepting Emily's true nature. As the younger sibling, he'd idolized his sister throughout their childhood. Learning that she was capable of attempted murder shattered his world in ways that were painful to watch. I keep going over every conversation we had, Michael told me during one of his visits. She manipulated me just as much as she manipulated you. She had me convinced that you wanted her to manage your money, that you trusted her completely. She fooled all of us, I reminded him. That's what sociopaths do. They're experts at manipulation and deception. Michael and his wife Sarah had been incredibly supportive throughout the trial and recovery process. They'd moved their family temporarily closer to Boise so they could help with my care and provide emotional support. Their 2 children, Emma and James, aged 8 and 6, brought joy and laughter back into my life when I needed it most. "Grandma, why is Aunt Emily in jail?" Emma asked me one day with the directness that only children possess. It was a difficult conversation, but I tried to explain it in terms she could understand. Sometimes people make very bad choices that hurt other people. When that happens, they have to go to jail to keep everyone safe. Did she hurt you? Yes, sweetheart, she did. I'm sorry she hurt you, Grandma. I love you. Those simple words from my granddaughter meant more to me than all the legal victories and recovered assets combined. As the months passed, I began to reclaim not just my home and finances, but my sense of self. The experience had changed me fundamentally. I was no longer the trusting, somewhat naive woman who had given her daughter unlimited access to her life and resources. I'd become stronger, more skeptical, but also more appreciative of the genuine love and support I received from Robert, Michael, and my grandchildren. I also decided to use my experience to help others. Elder abuse is far more common than most people realize, and victims often suffer in silence because they're ashamed that their own family members have betrayed them. I began volunteering with the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare's Adult Protective Services Division. sharing my story with other seniors who were facing financial abuse from family members. Many of them were shocked to learn that what they were experiencing had a name and that legal remedies were available. I thought it was normal for my son to control my finances, one elderly man told me during a support group meeting. He said I was too old to manage my own money. No one is too old to control their own life, I told him. If someone is taking your money without permission, that's theft, regardless of whether they're family or strangers. My speaking engagements grew from small support groups to larger community events. Local banks began inviting me to speak to their staff about recognizing signs of elder financial abuse. The police department asked me to help train officers who responded to domestic abuse calls involving seniors. The irony wasn't lost on me that Emily's attempt to destroy my life had actually given it new purpose and meaning. By trying to make me a victim, she'd transformed me into an advocate for other victims. 6 months after Emily's sentencing, I received an unexpected letter from her in prison. My first instinct was to throw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was 3 pages long and appeared to be Emily's attempt at an apology. She claimed to be receiving counseling in prison and said she was beginning to understand the magnitude of what she'd done. She wrote about her gambling addiction, her financial pressures, and her resentment toward me for having money while she struggled with debt. But what struck me most was what was missing from the letter: any genuine acceptance of responsibility for her actions. Even in her supposed apology, Emily portrayed herself as someone who had made mistakes rather than someone who had committed calculated, premeditated crimes. "I hope someday you can forgive me and we can have some kind of relationship again," she wrote in closing. I showed the letter to Robert and Michael, and we all agreed that Emily was still trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. This wasn't genuine remorse. It was another attempt to control the narrative and perhaps lay groundwork for future appeals or parole hearings. I wrote back a single paragraph. "Emily, I received your letter. While I hope prison helps you become a better person, I need you to understand that attempting to murder someone isn't a mistake. It's a choice. Until you can accept full responsibility for your actions without excuses or justifications, there can be no relationship between us. I wish you well, but I will not be responding to future letters." It was the hardest letter I'd ever written, but also the most necessary. The old Margaret might have accepted Emily's half-hearted apology and tried to rebuild their relationship. But the new Margaret understood that some betrayals are simply unforgivable, especially when the person who committed them shows no genuine remorse. As I sealed that letter and dropped it in the mailbox, I felt a sense of closure that had been eluding me since Emily's arrest. I was finally ready to move forward with my life, not as Emily's victim, but as a survivor who had found strength she never knew she possessed. 2 years have passed since that terrible morning on Eagles Peak, and as I sit here writing this story, I'm amazed at how much my life has changed. The sunrise that was supposed to be my last has become a symbol of rebirth and new beginnings. Every morning when I watch the sun rise over the mountains visible from my kitchen window, I'm reminded that I survived something meant to destroy me. Emily is serving her sentence at the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center. She was denied parole last month after serving only 2 years of her 25-year sentence. According to the parole board's report, she still hasn't shown genuine remorse for her crimes and continues to blame others for her actions. She sent me 4 more letters since my response to her first one, but I've returned them all unopened. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. My physical recovery has been remarkable. The doctors initially worried that I might have permanent mobility issues or cognitive impairment from the traumatic brain injury, but I've exceeded all their expectations. I walk 3 miles every morning. I've returned to volunteering at the hospital where I once worked, and my memory is as sharp as it ever was, perhaps sharper, because I no longer take anything for granted. The financial recovery was equally successful. We ultimately recovered $187,000 of the money Emily had stolen, and the insurance settlement for my medical expenses and emotional trauma added another $125,000. More importantly, I learned to manage my finances more carefully, setting up safeguards to prevent anyone from ever having unlimited access to my accounts again. Michael has grown tremendously through this experience. The shy, trusting teacher who never questioned his sister's motives has become a strong advocate for his family and a protective son who checks on me regularly without being overbearing. He and Sarah bought a house just 10 minutes from Robert and me, and we see our grandchildren several times a week. Grandma, Emma said to me last week. "My teacher says you're famous because you help people who get hurt by their families." She was referring to the nonprofit organization I founded called Sunrise Survivors, which provides support and advocacy for elderly victims of family abuse. What started as informal support group meetings in church basements has grown into a recognized organization with funding from the state and partnerships with law enforcement agencies throughout Idaho. We've helped over 300 seniors in the past 18 months, recovering more than $2.8 million in stolen assets and obtaining protective orders against abusive family members. More importantly, we've shown isolated and ashamed elderly victims that they're not alone and that speaking up about family abuse takes courage, not weakness. My story has been featured in newspapers and magazines across the country. I've testified before the Idaho State Legislature about the need for stronger elder abuse protection laws, and I've spoken at conferences in 12 states about recognizing and preventing financial exploitation of seniors. Last month, I received a letter from a woman in Oregon whose son had been stealing her Social Security checks. She'd heard my story on a podcast and found the courage to report him to authorities. He's now facing criminal charges, and she's getting her life back. "I thought I had to protect him because he's my son," she wrote. "But you helped me understand that protecting an abuser isn't love. It's enabling them to hurt others." These letters arrive regularly now, and each one reminds me why I continue sharing my story despite the pain of reliving those terrible events. Robert and I celebrated our 28th wedding anniversary last month with a trip to Hawaii, something we'd always talked about but never made time for. As we watched the sunrise over the Pacific Ocean, I thought about how different this sunrise was from the one that nearly ended my life. "Do you ever regret that I didn't just let sleeping dogs lie?" I asked Robert as we sat on the beach that morning. "We could have just moved away, tried to forget what Emily did, lived quietly with the secret." Robert took my hand and looked into my eyes with the same love and determination I'd seen throughout this entire ordeal. "Margaret, you've helped hundreds of people by speaking up about what happened to you. How many other Emilys are out there who might think twice before hurting their parents because they've heard your story? How many families have been saved because you had the courage to seek justice?" He was right. The ripple effects of standing up to Emily have extended far beyond our own family. Police departments now receive better training about elder abuse investigation. Banks have implemented new safeguards to protect elderly customers from financial exploitation by family members, and hundreds of seniors have found their voices because I found mine. As for Emily herself, I've made peace with the fact that the daughter I thought I raised never really existed. The loving child I remembered was a mask worn by someone whose true nature was revealed only when she thought no one was watching. I mourn the loss of that imaginary daughter, but I refuse to waste any more energy grieving for someone who was never real. Instead, I focus on the family I do have: Robert, Michael, Sarah, Emma, and James. I focus on the survivors I work with every day who are reclaiming their lives from abusive family members. I focus on the advocacy work that gives meaning to my experience and turns my pain into purpose. I'm 66 years old now, and I've never felt stronger or more purposeful. Emily tried to push me off a cliff to end my story, but instead she pushed me into a new chapter that's more meaningful than anything I could have imagined. Every morning when I watch the sunrise, I'm reminded that each day is a gift. Emily intended that October morning to be my last, but instead, it became the first day of the rest of my life, a life dedicated to helping others find their strength and their voice. To anyone watching this video who recognizes themselves in my story, I want you to know that you deserve better. You deserve to live without fear, to control your own finances, to be treated with respect by your family. Age doesn't make you a target, and family relationships don't excuse abuse. If someone you love is hurting you, stealing from you, or threatening you, please reach out for help. Contact Adult Protective Services, speak to your bank about suspicious account activity, or reach out to organizations like Sunrise Survivors. You are not alone, and it's never too late to take back control of your life. Thank you for listening to my story. Please like this video and subscribe to our channel if it's helped you in any way. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there. But more importantly, tell me about your own journey or how this story has impacted you. Remember, every sunrise is a new beginning. No matter how dark your night has been, the sun will rise again. And when it does, you can choose to rise with it. Stay strong, stay vigilant, and never let anyone convince you that abuse is love. Because the people who truly love you will never try to push you off a cliff. They'll help you climb to higher ground. Until next time, this is Margaret Wilson reminding you that survival isn't just about living through trauma. It's about transforming that trauma into something that helps others heal. The sun is rising, and so are we.